Let us move on to the annelid worms. So we were exploring the mollusks here, so let's look at the sister taxon of the annelids. The phylum Annelida or Annelida are the true segmented worms. They display this feature, this characteristic called metamerism. This is true segmentation, and they get their name from the Latin root of annulus, which means small ring. This includes over 22,000 different species. These are our earthworms, these are our bristleworms, and these are our leeches. They do display that characteristic bilateral symmetry, and we'll get into their distinguishing characteristics in the next slide. So again, this idea of metameric segmentation. There are several internal and external morphological features that are represented in each body segment. And gas exchange is facilitated by having a moist coating on the outside of the body. That's why it's extremely important not to dry out. If you are an earthworm, you need to have that moist outer covering to facilitate gas exchange. Excretion is performed through this primitive kidney that's called a nephridium. So here, taking a look at just one segment, we have the nephridium represented right here. And all of this repeats again and again and again in the different segments. That's why these are called the true segmented worms. We do have a well-developed nervous system within most of our annelids, and most annelids possess a closed circulatory system of dorsal and ventral blood vessels that run in parallel. So here we have the ventral blood vessel, ventral meaning the underbelly side. We also have the dorsal blood vessel, meaning the back side. The brain is located at the anterior end, so the front end is where we have the brain of our earthworms. And this brain is connected to ganglia that is found in each and every segment. So it's important to remember that in the annelids, we have different segments that contain pretty much the same repeating anatomy. Let's go through the different classes of our annelid worms. First, we have the polychaetes, or class Polychaeta. In the polychaetes, this is where we have our bristle worms. In the bristle worms, we have arranged in clusters at the fringes of the animal, clusters called parapodia. These parapodia are fleshy, flat, paired appendages that protrude from each and every segment. Most polychaetes use their parapodia to crawl across the seafloor, but others can actually use this for swimming or for floating as well. Some of the polychaetes are sessile, living in tubes. So if you ever hear polychaete worms at hydrothermal vents, for example, this is what people are talking about. These deep water tube worms, as they're called, have no digestive tract. Instead, they have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that live inside of their bodies. Isn't that incredible? Next, let's move to the earthworms. The earthworms are within the class Oliglochaeta, okay? This means few bristles. So earthworms are the most abundant members of the Oliglochaeta. They are distinguished by the presence of a permanent clitellum, and they also are distinguished by the presence of very small number of reduced tiny hairs on each segment. So they don't have those parapodia as we see within our bristleworms. Instead, they have these tiny, tiny hairs that protrude out of the side. Next, we have a subclass of the Oliglochaeta. This is the Hierodenia. The Hierodenia contain our leeches, imaged here. I didn't want to show you all of the other disgusting images that Google Images provides for leeches, but just remember that leeches are a subclass within the Oliglochaeta. Moving on now to the roundworms, our nematode worms. These are our roundworms. They're not true segmented worms, as we just explored with the phylum Annelida. Instead, they have this outer cuticle, which is rich in chitin, and they're usually microscopic. You typically need a microscope in order to see their anatomy. They're often used as laboratory models to explore various things. And so if you ever see C. elegans, that is a type of nematode worm. This is their basic anatomy with the head ganglia and the mouth and the pharynx at the anterior end, all bounded by this cuticle, this outer covering composed of chitin. Next, we're going to move into the tardigrades, which are a close relative. The tardigrades are also called water bears, and these are a special type of organism because they display this feature called cryptobiosis. This allows them to survive harsh environmental conditions like drying out, desiccation, very low temperatures, even surviving the vacuum of space. Yes, we have sent tardigrades into space. They can suspend their metabolic activity for years and survive the loss of up to 99% of their entire water content. They put themselves in this cryptobiotic state by sucking in all of their appendages, including their face, and they are able to generate these unique proteins that replace water in their cells. And it's their way of protecting their internal cell structure and their DNA from damage as they weather these very, very tough conditions. Next, we have the arthropods up here, and this is a very, very vastly diverse phylum. This is the phylum Arthropoda, meaning jointed feet. This is the largest phylum on the entire planet. About 75% of the animals on planet Earth are within this phylum. So they're extremely diverse. They include the insects, spiders, even our extinct trilobites, our centipedes, our millipedes, our crabs, our isopods. They're just everywhere, and they dominate every type of environment that we take a look in. They are characterized by this chitinous exoskeleton that provides to them support as well as protection. And they have structural and functional segmentation of the body. They also, of course, have jointed appendages, which is the reason why we call them jointed feet, the arthropods. Okay, so let's move into some subphyla of the arthropoda. First up, we have the Chelicerata or the Chelicerata. This includes our spiders, our mites, our harvestmen, our scorpions, and our horseshoe crabs. They get their name because they have these specialized claw-like or fang-like mouth parts called chelicerae. Okay, so that's where they get their name from. Full disclosure, I'm an arachnophobe. I had a lot of trouble searching Google Images for the Chelicerata, so these are the pictures that I got that I wouldn't freak out about. So moving on to the subphylum Myriapoda. Okay, virtually all myriapods are terrestrial animals and they prefer a humid environment. So you probably are most familiar with the Myriapoda in the millipedes. Perhaps you go on a hike in the woods and you see a millipede around, but we also have our centipedes as well. They are characterized by having numerous legs. So if you're a centipede, you have one leg per segment, or if you're a millipede, you have two. The first legs in the first segment within the centipedes, they are modified to form forcipules or poison claws. Okay, this is why a centipede is so dangerous. They have modified claws, which are actually legs, and they're called forcipules. This delivers poison to prey, like spiders and cockroaches, and all of our centipedes are predatory. Up next is a subphylum Crustacea. They are pretty diverse. This is the most dominant aquatic arthropod, and it includes both freshwater and marine species. We have over 70,000 different crustacean species, including lobsters, shrimp, our krill, crabs, crayfish, and our isopods. Terrestrial isopods you might know by a different name called roly-polies or pill bugs. And I just want to show you what the deep sea counterpart of the isopod looks like. So here we have, you know, the unassuming terrestrial roly-poly that you find when you lift up a rock. This is what it looks like at the bottom of the sea.
We've just got a Bathynomus giganteus swimming interview, and these are one of the most charismatic deep sea animals that you can possibly find. They are very closely related to the wood lice, which you get living on dead trees and so on, but except these ones are massive. They're usually about a foot long and are just one of my favorite deep sea animals, and I'm so glad we got to see one already. Giant isopod. They are really, really important scavengers in the deep sea benthic environment. They're thought to be found worldwide and are a really, really great example of deep sea gigantism. Most isopods found in the deep sea are smaller than your thumbnail. And so this is a huge break from tradition, as it's, you know, as much as a foot long or even more in some cases. To some people, they're really cute. To some people, they're the stuff of nightmares.
So that's for you to decide. All right, moving on to the subphylum Hexapoda. This is a subphylum containing all of our insects. They get their name because hex means six, poda means legs or feet, so they are the subphylum six legs. The order Hemiptera or Hemioptera are the true bugs, okay? So when someone says bug, they mean the Hemiptera. Someone who says beetles is talking about the Coleoptera. Okay, so these are very distinct orders within the subphylum Hexapoda, referring to true bugs as imaged right here, or our Coleoptera, containing all of our beetles. And the suffix ptera is used to form words related to wings. So that's how you can tell these words apart from others. If it ends with this specific suffix, that means that that organism possesses wings. What's fascinating about the beetles is that we have about 350,000 to 400,000 different species of beetles on our planet today. So extreme diversity at the species level. And this is probably an apocryphal story, but legend has it that JBS Haldane was asked by someone in the church, what can we learn about God from the living world? And he remarked, if he exists, the creator has an inordinate fondness for beetles. So there you have it. And so our subphylum Hexapoda is extremely diverse. Some things have wings, like our butterflies and our stink bugs, for example. Others, like the walking stick and our ants, do not. But what they all have is this chitinous exoskeleton. They have an exoskeleton and specialized tagmata, or different segments. So first, let's talk about this chitinous exoskeleton. Of course, it's made of chitin. That's why we call it chitinous. It allows the animal to move, and all of the muscles are attached to the exoskeleton. And moving that part of the animal is facilitated when those muscles contract. So movement is really facilitated by the presence of this chitinous exoskeleton. It also, of course, confers protection to those internal organs and muscles. And then finally, as you probably all remember from high school biology, we have the three different segments, or the three different tagmata: the head region, the thorax region, and the abdomen region. And this is not just for the hexapods. We have this segmented body plan also appearing in our crustaceans as well. Next, we're going to move into the Echinodermata. Okay. So here, the Echinodermata gets its name from prickly skin. So in Latin, prickly is echono, and dermata is relating to skin, like dermatology, dermata. So all of our echinoderms have prickly skin. These are our starfish, our brittle stars, our sand dollars, our sea urchins, and our sea cucumbers. There's about 7,000 species. All of them are marine. They exhibit this pentaradial symmetry, which we've already discussed. And what's fascinating is if I were to ask you, okay, here's a sea urchin, where's its head? It actually doesn't have a head region. So therefore it is not possessing cephalization. What is fascinating though is that these organisms are deuterostomes. So if you remember back to part 1 of this lecture series on invertebrates, the deuterostomes include things like you and me that has our mouth forming second. Okay, so therefore echinoderms are the closest living invertebrate relatives to you and me. They are dioecious, meaning that there are distinct males and distinct females, but they do not possess this feature of sexual dimorphism, where the males look different from the females. And as you learned in previous lectures, they do exhibit both sexual and asexual reproduction, with the ability to, in sea stars especially, just pull off parts of themselves so that they can reproduce. Echinoderms have an endoskeleton that's made of calcareous ossicles, or small bony plates. And this is covered by an epidermis. For this reason, it's fascinating. This endoskeleton is much like our own and not so much similar to that of the arthropods, for example. These ossicles can be fused together, embedded separately in the connective tissue of the dermis, or they can just be reduced to minute little spicules of bone, like as we see in the sea cucumbers. Echinoderms have this unique system of walking, and it is called the water vascular system, or the ambulacral water system, derived from part of the body cavity or the coelom. And so the water vascular system consists of a central ring canal and radial canals that extend along each arm. Each radial canal is connected to a double row of these tube feet, okay? These protrude from each arm, and this is what each individual tube foot looks like. And this is just projecting straight through holes in the endoskeleton. It can function both as a tactile feature, so able to touch and sense its environment, but also it is used for walking and mobility. Seawater enters the system through the aboral madreporite. So the madreporite on the side opposite of the mouth is the aboral madreporite. What's fascinating about the digestive habits of the sea star in particular is that in order to eat, it removes its stomach and encases its prey inside of its stomach that it everts, okay, so not inverting, but everting, and then it draws the prey inside. So here is a video of a sea star that is feeding. It's actually putting its stomach back inside of its body. See that gelatinous mass? It was wrapped around the shell-eyed organism, which it could digest, shell and all. But now, since the prey has been removed, it was pulling its stomach back inside. Very crazy way to eat, but hey. All right, let's get into the different classes of the echinoderms. The most well-known echinoderms are the members of the class Asteroidea, or the sea stars. They come in a large variety of shapes, colors, sizes. There's almost 2,000 different species of sea stars. And the key characteristic of sea stars that distinguishes them from the other echinoderm classes that we'll talk about in a second includes these thick arms that protrude from the central disc. At the end of each arm are eye spots and tentacles that serve as touch receptors. So each of the 5 arms in this animal contains an eye spot to sense its environment. Next, we have the Ophidia. Ophidia gets its name meaning snake tails. These are our brittle stars. Okay, so unlike the sea stars that have those really thick, plump arms, brittle stars have long, thin, flexible arms that are sharply demarcated from that central disc. Okay, so these brittle stars, they can move by lashing out their arms and wrapping them around objects and pulling themselves forward. They can also use these arms to grasp prey and bring it to the center of their body where they can engulf it and eat their prey. Next, we have the Echinoidea. Echinoid, again, means prickly. These are our sand dollars as well as our sea urchins. And these guys obviously are very good representatives of their prickly name, especially with the sea urchin right here. Next, we have the crinoids in the class Crinoidea. These are our sea lilies and feather stars. The sea lilies are sessile, meaning that the body is attached to a stalk and the stalk does not move from the seafloor here, okay? So it is not a mobile animal, it is instead sessile. These are suspension feeders. They collect small food and dissolved organic particles from their surrounding water through their feather-like arms here, okay? And there are about 600 extant crinoids today, so living species. Most of them have gone extinct throughout Earth's history. And if you remember, we looked at during our fossil lab, the crinoid stems from the sea lilies. And finally, we have the sea cucumbers, which look exactly like they sound. This is in the Holothuridia class of the echinoderms, are our sea cucumbers here. All right, we made it through all of the invertebrates. Whew, that was a whole lot. So the next round of lectures are going to be focused on the chordates, the vertebrates like you and me. Now, if you pay close attention, you'll notice that the chordates are a sister group to the echinoderms, and that's because both chordates and echinoderms are those deuterostomes, okay? So again, this is just driving home the idea or the fact that echinoderms are our closest living invertebrate relatives.